Hey guys, how's it going? It is another day, another week for another live show. It is LAB78. Welcome, my name is Sky, and welcome to the YouTube channel, Espresso with Sky. Now, if this is your first time joining us here, or if you haven't done so yet, go ahead and hit that like, that little thumbs up button down there. Just go hit that like button. But most importantly, I want you guys to subscribe, okay? Now, subscribe, and you're like, okay, like and subscribe, that's great, but there's something more you can do. Right? There's something more you can do to just destroy the YouTube algorithm. That is, leave a comment below. Now, if you want to leave a comment below, there is a question I want to give to you guys today is, what type of person are you? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Okay? Go ahead, write that down in the comment. I want to hear what you are. You guys know who I am, right? I am like what you call 98% extrovert. I did one of those like personality tests, like the MBTI, and they said my extrovertness was like something along 93 or 94%, as you can tell. Okay? Yes, it is hot and humid, and it's time for a little bit of a coffee. Ooh, that's good. It's an iced latte. You know what? I'm not sleeping tonight, but it's okay. All right. Exciting news. Okay, before we get into the possible, my last episode in Malaysia, of course, it sounds like sad news and stuff like that, but before I get into that, my coffee's kicking in. We have like a new sponsor, okay? So a sponsor, like, what do you mean a sponsor? Well, there's a way that you can sponsor our channel. And we found the perfect site, right? Because it has nothing to do with anything else but coffee. And guess what the site is called? The site is called buymeacoffee.com. And it's a sponsorship site. And it's also in the description. And what happens here is, all you have to do is you only buy like per cup of coffee. Of course, there's other types of donations you can do, but this is like, buy me literally a cup of coffee. And go ahead, go to that website. You can support us by buying me a cup of coffee. We can chat on that website there. And also, I'll be posting up pictures of who bought me this coffee here and there. So be very grateful and thankful for us and this new sponsor, buymeacoffee.com. So if you like to do it for Espresso with Sky, you go ahead and buy me a coffee. All right. So what does that mean right now? The question is this my last episode here in Malaysia? Now, this doesn't mean that I'm going to like no longer do this channel anymore. Last episode in Malaysia. Is it possible? And it is very, very possible because my interview is just around the corner, so it could be done by next week, right? So next week, if the interviews, we're checking with the MCO and everything else like that, if it's still open. But after that interview, that could be like my last week, and then I'll have to head back to Canada. So I'm really, fingers crossed, in prayers, trying to figure out what's the best thing for me to do. But this is possibly the last episode, and there's a 50-50 chance, which is very, very high, that I won't be doing my next episode for LAB78 here. So I'm just gonna make sure that you guys know that this is possibly my last episode in Malaysia. But if you're out there, if you're Christian, go ahead and pray for me. If you're Muslim, I'm actually even more thankful because you pray 5 times a day, so you can pray 5 times a day for me, right? Pray 5 times a day for me. I'd be so happy to see that if it's possible, God willing, that I'll be able to stay here. Okay, so there's a big question that people have been asking me, especially because of my last video on Friday. Okay, so those of you, I don't know why, this is the video where it's the most duration. Like, people have been watching this the longest, but for some reason, there's not a lot of people actually watching this Friday video. But there is a story that I told in the video, and everyone keeps asking me, you've got to finish the video. Okay, so I think a lot of people here might not have heard the story yet, so I'll kind of recap the story, and I will finish this story for you. All right, so and those of you guys want to hear this, it's a very cool video that I made on Friday of how Netflix saves the world, right? And how Netflix can save our conversations, what we can learn from Netflix. But here's a story that I'm going to tell you. So obviously, I'm from Vancouver, Canada. And every year, I'm not sure if it still happens right now because I haven't lived in Canada for like 16 years. The last time I lived there was 2005, okay? So it's been 16 years since I've lived there. But when I was there, they had something called the Festival of Lights. Right? Or the Celebration of Lights. It's one of the two. And it was this huge fireworks competition, like every weekend, Friday, Saturday, 200,000 people would go down to the beach to watch the fireworks show, right? Or the competition, and would go on for an entire month. So it was this super exciting thing, different countries performing. And the crazy part is going home. So can you imagine 200,000 people in this small like peninsula, right, of an island, right? And what happens is we're all heading towards, all going home, and 200,000 people are walking on the streets. So crowded and packed. And I was like, oh my goodness. And for me, I don't know about you guys, I don't like walking, like bumping into people and stuff like that. It's just like, I just don't want to bother with this. So as everyone's taking the main street walking, me, my brother, and my brother's friend, we decide to take an alley. So we're taking the alley up, and I'm gonna be honest with you guys, it wasn't that scary. It's dimly lit, but it's not scary. Tons of people around, very few in the alley. And of course, my brother's a big guy, and my brother's friend is an even bigger guy. So physical safety, wasn't really worried about that. And as we're walking up, we can hear like someone pushing like a grocery cart right behind us. And like I said, guys, we're not sitting there like scared about anything else. And we can slowly hear the grocery cart getting closer and closer. Now, the interesting thing is this, is like, we're not scared, but it's kind of just like, oh, someone's getting closer, probably some homeless person, so we'll just move out of the way so that they can move up, okay? So as it gets closer and closer, I turn around and there's a homeless woman pushing a cart. And I just moved out of the way so she can go through. And then she says, Sky, Sky. And she says my name, right? So, it's kind of weird. Remember, it's not a scary thing at all. And we're kind of like, what the heck? So in my head, I'm like, maybe she heard us like talking to each other and she heard my name, right? So, I'm like, oh, and my head is like, do I know you? Like, do I really know you, right? And she says, Sky, Sky, do you remember me? And I'm like, oh, no. And then she says, you were my dog. Okay, so now this is where it gets kind of weird, like going, okay, this woman is crazy. So you know what? No way, this person's crazy, right? So we're like going, okay, just let this person pass, and we got to get this, we don't want to be around this person. And then she, the homeless woman says, no, I can prove it. And this is when we're kind of like, and we just started walking, and she's saying to us, wait, I can prove it. And you kind of stop to listen, and she says, when you were bad, right? When you were a bad dog, I had a metal chain, and I always hit you in the head with the chain. And she said, I know you have a scar behind your left ear. This is when me and my brother, we stopped and we're like, what? And we both kind of just like looked at each other, and then we kind of looked at the woman, because me and my brother know I have a scar behind my left ear. Now, when we asked, when my people ask, well, did you always have, how did it happen? And when we asked my parents a long time ago, they just said, no, you had it ever since you were young. And they didn't really know where the scar came from. So me and my brother look at each other like, no, and you can't see it because my hair is in the way, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get the videographer to take a look at it, right? So she can show you, like she'll prove it, and then I'll show you on the screen, right? So can you see it? Look behind. Okay, so. Oh gosh. So that's the story, that's the ending. Oh no. Okay. So sorry guys. It's one of those scary stories you tell to freak people out. And remember, if you guys watch the video on Friday, the point of me talking about these stories is about how we learn from Netflix about storytelling. So what happened in the Friday video, you guys can go ahead and watch this, but at the end, I don't tell people what the ending is, right? And it's kind of like people are left like, whoa, wait, what happened? And and the one thing that's very interesting about storytelling, and I think it's something that everyone should learn, is when you tell stories, there is a chemical that comes out of your brain in every single story. And you know what that story is? That chemical is dopamine, right? So it makes you really, really focus. So everyone, when you're listening to the story, everyone's like, oh no. A dog, what? And everyone's starting to get really focused, and we're centering onto this story, right? And what happens is, it's just like, don't you guys hate it when someone's like, hey, I have something to tell you. And you're like, what is it? And you're like, I'll tell you next time. They're like, no, don't do that. And that's what Netflix does, right? Netflix takes you to there and it's like, shoo, next episode, right? And we're like, no, I gotta watch the next episode. And this is why people keep binge watching, right? But we need to know that storytelling or stories is such an important part of just the history of mankind. Whether it was in the past, you see cave drawings, or when it turned into oral history, to written history, to radio, to TV. You know, storytelling is a really, really amazing thing that we can learn a lot from. And what happens is when you tell stories, people start to have higher levels of dopamine and we become very focused into a certain story, right? And you know, because it's a cliffhanger, people want to hear it, right? And this is why it's very interesting. I proved my point from the Friday because people kept texting me like going, what's the end of the story? What's the end of the story, right? And for me is I always use that story to, you know, scare people. I'm sorry. That's what I usually do with that story. And, you know, it's very hard to do it here when it's not live. And that's why I needed someone to come and look at it, to scare them, to freak them out. If you guys didn't hear it, she screamed, but you can't really hear it because the mic's on me and it's not on her. So, yeah. I'm very sorry to my videographer. But I have already bought her a drink beforehand to make up for it before it happened. So, you know, she's giving me the evil, dirty look, but that's okay. Because it's nothing another latte cannot fix. Now, storytelling is very interesting because it works in different ways. Like, you have the story that I just told you, and it gets people really focused. Another type of story is what about when someone tells a story about, you know, something sad that happens in their life, and then what happens to people? People feel for that person, right? So you got this, oh my goodness, what happened? It's one of those OMG stories that make us feel human, right? And it makes us closer and feel more attached to someone, right? And this is why when you talk about those audition shows, what happens there is you see this person from rags to riches and you're like, oh my goodness, they have to win. And you feel attached to them, right? You feel like empathy and you trust them more, right? So that's something that you have to look at in that sense too. And of course, one of the big things is it's making people laugh. And when people tell stories and make people laugh, you know what the interesting thing is? If you could tell a story to make someone laugh, you know what happens to that person's mind? Number one, they become more creative. Number two, they become more focused. And number three, they become more relaxed. And this is why storytelling is a very, very important part of our lives. And it's the people who are most interesting in conversations are the ones that are very good at telling stories, right? So this is something very interesting. I think something you have to kind of put into your arsenal. Why? Because when you have good conversation, or you know what a bad conversation is? A bad conversation is like at work you have meetings, right? At work, you know, you have to do your work, you're talking business, and if your bosses and people who are above you aren't very good with this, like these storytelling techniques, you kind of either get really stressed or scared about them too, right? So I hope that you guys will really be able to embrace storytelling. And I do give you a couple of tips from the Friday video. So go ahead and take a look at that if you want to get some tips of how to, you know, get more stories. I give you 2 tips there, but I'm going to do another video on how to do real storytelling. And it's something that I believe that a lot of people can benefit from because, you know, it's really weird in this day and age, because I was born in an age where there's no internet and there's no smartphones. Like there wasn't internet when I was born. It didn't even exist. Like in your home. And everything was done face-to-face talking, and we had to socialize. But here it's like I can sit next to someone and I have to text them to get their attention. Hey, what are you doing? And they're right across the table from me. Okay, so that is the finishing of the story. Sorry to disappoint you guys. Yes, remember it was all for that video to talk about how powerful storytelling is. Okay, so let's go into my life in Canada. Right? And a lot of people were asking me from, you know, a couple of videos back, like, you know, hey, Sky, talk about your life. What's life like in Canada for you? Now, I'm going to talk about, you know, just more of the beginning parts of my life in Canada first. And those of you who don't know, I was born in Vancouver, Canada. Okay. My parents were immigrants from Korea. And I told you guys this before, but my uncle won a writing contest. And when he won that contest, he won a free immigration to Canada for 20 of his family members. And that's how we came over. One thing that's very, very interesting between the relationship between me and my parents is I grew up speaking English without speaking Korean, and my parents grew up speaking Korean without speaking English. So you can imagine what, the communication was like. Like when my dad gets mad, honestly, he sounds like a barking dog. He's like, right? I'm just like, oh, and all I know is he's mad, but I have no idea what he's saying, right? He's like, I'm like, oh, okay, right? And there was no communication. There wasn't a lot. I can only understand like basic Korean stuff. Guys, I didn't even start learning Korean until after I was 30 years old. I think like 32, I really started to learn Korean. I lived in Korea for 5 years, right? So during this entire like 30 years of my life, the first 30 years, I never had that real deep relationship with my parents because there wasn't that deep communication. So if I were to share with you my relationship with my parents, I can tell you the relationship with my parents in one story. Okay, I'll tell you one story, and this one story will tell you everything about my parents. Okay, so I'm gonna give you one story, and it's gonna teach you about my relationship with my parents. So, for myself, I was kind of what you call a late bloomer. So I was very small and a skinny child, and my brother was he was an early bloomer. Like he hit puberty, I think it was like 10 or 11, something like that. He hit really early, right? So he started like getting a mustache at like 12, 13. He has to start shaving. He's got armpit hair coming out of his shirt. I'm like, whoa, he's hairy. His arms are like all bushy and stuff. And here me, like I'm over 40 years old. I have no hair in my arms still. I've never shaven. And all the girls are jealous around me like, hey, how'd you do that? Do you shave? I'm like, no, it's just the way I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. Because a lot of girls have to shave, but I don't get any hair in my arms, right? I was a late bloomer. My brother, American football player, ice hockey player, rugby player. He was like, right? He's like really, really tough guy. And I hit puberty at 14, 15. Okay? So I hit really late. And crazy thing is in Canada, we get our driver's license at 16, like in our state. However, the state next to us, because it's not a lot of people and it's just a lot of farmland, they get their license at 15, right? So what happened was one of my good friends, his father lives in the state next door. So he goes to visit his father for the summer and he gets his license. And he comes back to Vancouver at 15. He has a driver's license. And you're like, me and my friends are like, oh, yeah, you got it. And his father bought him a car. So he's got a car and a license at 15. We are super excited. And of course, my parents are scared as heck. Like, what are you doing, right? So I'm like, Mom, man, I'm like 15 already. Man, I should be able to go out. And they're like, okay, all right, honey, you can go out and have some fun. And I'm like, all right, cool. So me and my buddies, my friend pulls up in his car. It was a junk car, but still, it was a car. We're like, yeah. And we're freaking out. And my dad's like, he's like, Sky, come home by 10. And I was like, okay, Dad, okay. I'm just excited, right? So we go out and we get in the car and we go off and we're like, so excited. It's so exciting, right? We're 15, but we're driving. So it feels like we're rebels too. So here we are, these like prepubescent, early teenagers driving in a car. And we thought to ourselves, like, wait a second. Where should we go? Like, where do we go, right? And we're like, I don't know. Where do 15-year-olds go? You can't go, we can't drink. We can't go to nightclubs. We can't even go to bars. We can't do anything. So we're like, what do you want to do? And you know where we ended up going? We ended up going 7-Eleven. So we ended up going to a 7-Eleven, right? We pull into the 7-Eleven. It's like slow motion. The doors open and like these 15-year-olds are coming out like we're so cool, right? And we go into 7-Eleven. I'm like, man, we just drove here. And I go in there, I get myself a bag of chips and a Slurpee and, because it was a mix and match deal, right? So it's cheap because, 15-year-olds don't have any money. So I have a bag of chips and we go outside. We're like leaning on the car, drinking Slurpees and eating our chips. Like we're the coolest people ever, right? So we're like, all right. So, after like 30, 40 minutes passes by, like we're talking and stuff and we're like, all right, so where do we go next? And we're like, I don't know. We ended up driving to another 7-Eleven. on driving to another 7-Eleven. We drive in, and then we're going inside. I get the same thing. I get the chips and a Slurpee, and we drink by the car. We're like, yeah, we're so cool. And I'm telling you guys, the thing that was so cool is it just felt so like, man, we're so different from everyone else because all the other 15-year-olds are at home, but we are 15-year-olds driving a car, right? And then it's getting close to 10 p.m., okay? So it's getting close to 10 p.m., and my friends are like going, I'm like going, oh, man, guys, I think I gotta go home because my dad said I gotta be home by 10. It's like already like 9:40, 9:50, right? And they're like going, come on, man. We got a car. And I'm like, yeah, I know, man. Like, and they're like, it's like, we got a car and we're going to go to the next 7-Eleven. and, you know, for me, I'm just like a 15-year-old. You know, you don't really think properly. And, you know, I was like, you know what I said? I was like, yeah, screw it. Screw my dad. Let's go out. Yeah. And then we go drive off to another 7-Eleven and we're going over 7-Eleven and we do the same thing. And guess what, guys? I swear we probably hit anywhere from like 5 to 7 different 7-Elevens, right? We just kept going 7-Eleven to 7-Eleven to 7-Eleven, right? And when everything was done, guys, you guess what time it was? It was 2 a.m. Okay, so this is when it gets, like, this is when the fun ends for me. Because, you know, my friends, their parents were cool with it for some reason. I don't know why. But for me, I'm just like, oh my goodness. And, you know, we're pulling into my house. And I'm like telling the guys, like, hey, guys, you guys got to slow down, turn the engine off, right? I'm like, my parents can't hear it, right? And they're like, oh, yeah. So they put into neutral and we're kind of gliding to the front of my house, right? And we're gliding to the front of my house. And then we slowly... And I'm like, I look at the house and it is dark and it's scary. Like, how am I gonna do this? So I'm like, guys, you gotta be quiet. And they're like, all right. So, you know, slowly they open the door, right? I come out and I'm like going, hey guys, just gotta leave quietly, right? So they take off. And now I'm just like staring at my house like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. And you start to regret all the different 7-Elevens you've gone to because, you know, think about it. All you do is eat chips and Slurpee and you have like a stomach ache by this point. You're like, oh my gosh. So I walk up to the door and I slowly put my key in to make the littlest sounds. And it's like, shh. I'm like, this is it. And I slowly grip the handle and I open it slightly just to make sure there's no sound. It's like, it's like, okay, I can't do this. So it was only open this much. So I opened and I slid myself in sideways into the door so that I didn't have to open the door, right? So I slid myself in. I closed the door as quietly as possible. The next obstacle was the stairs. And, you know, in most houses, it's a wooden floors, right? So it makes sounds. So what I do is I know already, because I've done this multiple times, where the stairs don't make sound. So I go to the very edge and I'm slowly walking up the sides, holding the rail, pulling myself up, right? And I pull myself up, I get to the top and I'm like, okay, I don't think anyone woke up. So I slowly start walking towards my room, but this is the last part. Because my room is at the very end of the hall and it's right next to my parents' room. Remember, I'm like this 15-year-old kid, right? Right next to my parents. I'm like, please God. And I'm slowly walking. And I made it. And I'm like, oh, thank God. And I put my hand to the door. And then I hear, Sky? And I was like, oh. I was like, what? And I was like, wait, where's that sound coming from? And I look behind me, I'm like, wait, that's not coming from the bedroom. I turn around, I walk back down the hallway, and I go into the living room. It's dark. And in the living room is my dad sitting in the dark on this sofa like this. He's just sitting there like this. And it's in the dark, and I'm just like, oh my I'm like, right? I'm like, and he comes to me and he says to me, what time is it? And I was like, oh, and of course I'm a kid, I have to lie. I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, get the stick. And I'm like, the stick, right? And I turn around behind me and there's 3 sticks on the wall. There is a baseball bat, a hockey stick, and a golf club. And I was like, right? I'm like, I'm supposed to pick my weapon of how I'm gonna get beaten by my dad. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I'm like sitting there, I'm like, what do I pick? And then, I do what every other kid is. Like before I even get there, I'm like, I start walking towards it and I'm crying already. And I'm like going, which one should I choose? And I'd like, just take the hockey stick. And the reason I chose the hockey stick is the hockey stick's wooden and the other 2 are metal, right? So I'm just like, just take the hockey stick. It's wooden. It's longer. There's more leverage, but it's wooden. It's not going to hurt as much, right? So I'm like, okay. So I pick this stick. I'm like, and I give it to my dad, right? And my dad's like, turn around. And I'm like, ooh, and I turn around, right? And he's like, put your hands up. So I put my hands up like this, and I'm about to be beaten by a hockey stick, okay? I already have tears coming out right now, guys. This memory is giving me tears, right? So I'm about to get beaten by a hockey stick, and I'm just like, but he's not hitting me, right? I'm like, what the heck? And I kind of peer to turn around. You know what my dad's doing? My dad's practicing. He's like, I'm like, and I'm like just crying more. And my dad's like, and I'm like, oh no, right? So I sit there like, and then this is when the first hit, like we're talking, all I know is he said, put your hands up. I put my hands up. And I'm telling you this, guys, this is one of the pains. It was such a crazy pain that even when I got hit, there was no sound, right? So it's like he hits me, and this is what I do. It's like, I'm like, and nothing comes out of my mouth because it's like, it's like I lost all my, he hit the breath out of me. And I was like, and then he keeps hitting me over and over, and he hit me 10 times. Okay, guys? Like we're talking, there were so many welts in the back of my leg. And guys, my dad is not like a child beater or anything like that. He's only done this once, right? He's only done this once, right? So please do not call child services on my dad, okay, guys? That was like 30 years ago, and it's okay, either way, right? So after I get hit, my dad's like, go to your room. And, of course, at that point, when it's all finished, I'm this angry kid. And I start stomping to my room. And while I'm stomping to my room, I'm like praying curses on my dad. I'm like, I hope, Dad, you get hit by a car tomorrow. And then like I'm praying curses on him, walking to my room. I get to my bed, and I'm lying there, and I'm just screaming into my pillow like, I hate you, Dad, right? And I'm just crying, right? And then, all of a sudden I get this, there's a knock at my door. And I'm like, go away. And the door slowly opens, and it's my mom. And my mom's like, hey, Sky. And I'm like, and of course, at that time, you want your mom. So she comes in, and then, she checks my legs, like, oh, it must hurt. I'm like, I'm just crying. I'm like, oh, I hate Dad so much. I hope he dies, right? So I'm praying against my dad. Like, it curses against my dad, right? So what happens is, he is just sitting there, and my mom's just sitting me and just like, soothing me. And I'm just sitting there like cursing my dad. And then my mom all of a sudden asks me a question, and she says, do you know why your dad hit you? And then, of course, I'm still not in a good mood. And I was like, why? Because I came home late? You know where I went? 7-Eleven. And I'm just crying, and I'm trying to think of all the ways that my dad is a bad person, right? And then my mom asks this interesting question, and she says to me, do you know how many times your dad waited? And I was like, huh? And it's like, this is not your first time being late. And I was like, huh. And she says, this is the 10th time your dad has been waiting in that seat, worried about you. And every time you came home, he saw you're safe and then he went to bed. And at that point, I was sitting down to myself like, And it took me years before I finally understood what that meant. But 10, years later, I finally realized, wow, my dad really wasn't that bad. It was actually me causing him so much pain and so much suffering. And when I finally understood the situation more, I realized, wow, this is how much my parents have loved me, more than I'm only remembering the times that they hit me. And the reason I want to share this story is because this one story is kind of telling you what my relationship was like with my parents. There wasn't much communication talking because there was a language barrier there, but the love was really strong. And I really respect and love my parents. And now that I can speak Korean, I'm able to talk with my parents a lot more. But that's kind of what my life with my parents were like, right? I call that the 7-Eleven story. And a lot of people enjoy that one a lot. But I think the thing that people like the most and enjoy the most is kind of the ending part, is when I finally realized, wow, I made my dad wait like 9 times, worried to death. Why? Think about it. A 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, or a 15-year-old coming home really late, and that time was 2 a.m., right? So I really hope that, one of the big realizations I have is we often get upset or we misunderstand people because of the things we don't see, right? The 9 times I was late, I never saw my dad waiting to see I was okay and safe before he went to bed. And I didn't see like how much like worry or anxiety he had that here's my 13-year-old, 14-year-old son going out all by himself. Anything could happen to him in this world. And because I didn't see that, I wasn't really able to kind of appreciate what my dad, or how much my dad and my mom really, really loved me. So if I were to tell you just in a nutshell what that story, that's kind of in a nutshell, story means to me, right? That story, not what it means to me, but that's my relationship with me and my parents, right? So that is a story I really, really like to tell. And I hope it kind of opens your eyes too about your relationship with your parents. Because yes, it is, our parents have done some things bad to us. And, they're human and they're going to make their mistakes. But there's a lot of things that we don't see. And that's why if you have your parents out there, go ahead and thank them and make sure that you really, really tell them how much you love them and thank them for all that they've done for you. And there's just a lot of things that you haven't seen right now. All right, guys? So, that's kind of the story I really, really want to talk about today, because people want to know about my life in Canada. I can't really talk about all my stories, but that is the big one I really want to talk about. I hope that, and I'm sure too, just like storytelling, you guys heard that story, and through that story, you get focused. Through that story, you laugh. Through that story, you feel empathy and like, wow, man, that's a really deep story. And I hope that, when we have these types of stories, we'll also be able to utilize these things when it comes to not just, conversation with your friends and family, but also at work, right? And even at school too. All right, guys, what does that mean? We're going to end this episode right here today. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I wanted to end things on a really, really good note. I don't know if this is really the last one, but there's a 50-50 chance I might not have a next episode in Malaysia. I'll have to do it in another country, but super grateful and thankful for all of you guys joining us here today. Like I said, right? And hit the notification bell. But, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. And what's the comment? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? Go ahead and leave that in the comments if you don't know what to write. Super grateful and thankful. And once again, if you want to sponsor this channel or just want to buy me a cup of coffee, go ahead to buymeacoffee.com/espresso with Sky, and you could just buy me a latte. All right, guys, everyone have a wonderful and amazing day. And we'll see you guys again, hopefully in 2 weeks in Malaysia, hopefully. All right, everyone have a wonderful night. See you later. Bye-bye.